Hi, this is Charlie Mato-Toyela from bluebearflutes.com. Just wanted to give you guys today a little bit of a story about flute making. A lot of people think that you really have to have a certain this or a certain that to make a Native American flute, or that you need specific hardwood from the Brazilian rainforest to make a really good sounding flute. And today, what I wanted to focus on was just basically how you can make a flute out of just about anything. I know many of you have seen me make flutes out of cardboard wrapping paper tubes over the holidays. We've made flutes out of tobacco stalks from a tobacco plant. We've made them out of corn stalks and sunflower stalks, and I think some of just about everything you can dream of, including bones and what have you. I usually try to stay with materials that are easily accessible and what have you. So today we're going to be making some flutes out of some different materials. What some of you may not know is that bamboo or river cane is actually a nice material for making a flute out of, simply because it's already hollow. If you can see in there, the hollow tube is the way most of the shaft of the bamboo or river cane is. This came off of a piece of river cane, so there was a node or a closed link on the material about here, and there was another one way over here. So river cane, the general one that grows here in the United States, has really far links. Now there is one other species of river cane that grows here that links are a little bit closer together, and then of course there's sawgrass, which is kind of small in most cases, make some wonderful small flutes out of it, although we have some pieces of sawgrass that get up to about an inch in diameter because we know where to look. This material here is a great material for making flutes. You still have that link. Every so often you have a link, so you have to deal with that. Not a problem though. It's something that people have been doing for a long time, and we like to make flutes out of it. Today though, I was thinking to myself, what kind of materials do you guys have that you can make flutes out of yourself? So, once again, looking in the shop, we have blanks of flutes that we have made. These are made out of lumber. You may not have a table saw or a router or something like that. So a lot of people ask us, well, how do you make a flute like a branch type flute? I guess that's a new nickname for flutes made out of a naturally curved or natural looking piece of wood. So we're going to talk about that. This here is a piece of sumac that a friend of mine, Bill, has sent me from Canada, and some really nice, beautiful wood. I've never seen a sumac this size in my entire life. I really like sumac, but there's so many different species of it. The ones I'm accustomed to are red and purple sumac. Red sumac specifically is the one I like because, I don't know if many of you know about it, but Cherokees have used their leaves for going in their tobacco mixture. It's a really neat plant. And then the berries from a sumac, we make a drink that's like Kool-Aid out of, so it's really good stuff, or at least I should say that I like it, and I'm not telling you to go out and try it yourself because you may pick the wrong berry and there are some poison ones. So, having said that, a little history about the plant. We're going to show how to make a flute out of a nice piece of, I guess, cut and cropped wood here that my friend sent me. It's a good straight piece of wood. We're going to make it one way, and then we're going to make it another way, so that you can see your options, and that way you can see how to make a flute out of just a stick that you found on the ground. And then we're also going to make it out of something a little different. Okay, so I was cleaning up my Bradford pear and thought, well, hey, there's a nice curved limb that would make an interesting looking flute. So why don't we go ahead and lop this up into flute size and take it back in the shop and see what we can make out of it. This is the piece that we rescued from my tree grooming that I did. That Bradford pear had kept running into my car every time we drive by it, so I figured that he needed a trim. And I'd hate to throw away such a nice looking specimen of a limb here, especially when it's one that we could use for our video. It does have a few extra little nubs, and I know a lot of you think, well, wouldn't it look cool if we could just leave that leaf on there? Unfortunately, the leaf will eventually dry and fall off, so I'm going to clean it up a little bit and make it my way, I guess. There's so many different people that make branch flutes, and they have so many different ideas. I've seen some of the most amazing flutes I would have never considered made out of a piece of natural material. So I'm just using my trusty hobby knife here. It's an X-Acto knife to clean up some of the limbs. So I want it to be kind of, I don't know, I usually make flutes out of wood that I've trimmed and cleaned and You know, it's not something I'm used to making it out of just a natural looking piece of material other than, say, river cane, for example. And I would think, since this is a Bradford pear, that it should trim up kind of nice. Pear wood is usually a preferred wood of turners, people that turn wood. At least it used to be. Probably get 1,000 comments tomorrow saying pear wood is the worst wood for making bowls out of I've ever used. So all we're doing is clean this up a little bit, and I think I'm going to leave the bark on it. I had debated this for some time, whether I should leave the bark on it or take it off. I'm going to clean this up a little bit too, but I think that's probably going to be our flute there. Let's go ahead and get started cutting on this guy. And you know, before I do, I should tell you, there is a way that people used to make flutes and a way that people make flutes today. Today, people would rather take a piece of wood, just using this as an example, most people would rather use a piece of wood like this western cedar here, and it'll be dried and maybe even kiln dried or what have you, but it'll at least be dried and properly seasoned, as people say, for it to be used for making something out of wood. Whereas like this guy here, he's been dried for some time. I've actually saved him for a little while now. Once again, thanks, Bill. I appreciate the wood. It's really beautiful. I can't wait to see what color it turns when it comes out, because usually this is only a hint of what color it's going to be. But with this material here, it's already pretty well cured out. It's a great piece of wood to work with. So this, still again, using a cured piece of wood, is more of a modern type technique. In the old days, people would start off with something that wasn't even a couple of days old. You know, they would start carving on it almost immediately when they get it, I believe. At least it makes good sense that way, right? The reason people would do this, though, is because the material is much harder to work when it's dry. For us, of course, it's not as hard to work when it's dry because we have so many different kinds of tools to work with. But once again, in the old days, people would select really a straighter piece of wood, more like this one, and while it's still fresh, green, and wet, they would split it, because it would split easier when it's wet, and carve the inside out because it would carve out easier while it's wet. There's only a few woods in the world that I'm familiar with that actually work better when they're dry than they do when they're wet by hand. With tools, of course, everything works better when it's dry. So, like this table saw here, it doesn't like to cut through wet wood as much as it does dry wood. So, okay, camera person back here. Anyway, so this piece of material here is a lot greener. The bark is still on it. We're going to hopefully keep the bark on it. If we don't, that'll be okay. Most of the branch flutes I've seen have been made and the bark's been taken off of them. But this guy here being in the green state, I'm really hoping that it helps us to carve our flute by hand out of it a little bit easier. So let's go cut him and see what it takes to go from there. The first thing I'm going to do is clean it up just a little bit so that these lines are a little straighter and nicer and neater. I've always felt like the branch flutes that have been made out of a natural shape of wood look the best whenever they're natural shape of wood and have some refinement in them. So that's what we're going to do here. Here's my trusty old scroll saw here. So it's got that knot there taken care of, and I think that's, I guess, the most unusual piece of it we're worried about. I'll go ahead and cut this off so we have it where I believe I'm going to start my mouthpiece. It's a nice looking little piece of wood. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim the bottom of this guy here too. Now once again, if you're working this type of flute with modern tools like this scroll saw here, or table saw, or bandsaw, or whatever you have, you may find that it is much easier to wait until it's dried before you work on it. So you may find a dried limb rather than working with a green one like this. The reason I'm working with the green one is because I'm going to use one of my favorite old hand tools that I used to make flutes with forever ago, and I'm going to use it to hollow this guy out with, to some degree, to whatever extent it'll allow me. Having said that, the next thing I'd like to mention to you, a lot of flute makers that use the natural curvature of the wood and what have you, like this one, they have different techniques for doing this next part. Some of them may use a scroll saw or a band saw. Some of them may use a hand saw, and some of them may split it with a knife. I've met flute makers that make these natural or branch type flutes with a number of different tools, and there's always room for improvement and ways to do things differently. You may decide to use a pencil and draw your line where you're going to split it, and you may not, because when you draw on this wood, it may be a little difficult to get off of the bark and retain the bark's color and shape and everything, if that's what you're trying to do. So that's where I'm probably not going to use a pencil. But what you want to look at is how you're going to split it. Myself, I like to follow the standard old split it right down the side and leave the front, which I've deemed this the front at this point, by the way. I like to leave the front in its own natural shape and everything. I do have one friend that has split a lot of them down the front rather than down the side, and the fingerings and everything are in the split line. And that's one way to do it. It's just not the way I'm going to do it today. So let's see. I think I'm probably going to use my scroll saw to do this. I imagine it's going to be a slow go, and I'll probably break at least one blade in the process. Let's see what happens. Predictability. Let's see, we lost it inside of the tool too, which is bad because I've got to dig it out now before we can start up again. And the reason that we broke the blade is probably because there's a knot there, or because it's gumming up a little bit, causing excess friction and heat, possibly dulling the blade a little bit, and eventually, anyway, here we are. So we're going to get started with a new blade. Minor problem here. Oops, I may have snapped him out of the socket there. Now, one minor problem is, there we go. Well, my blade's a little crooked for one thing. That's blade number 2. The size of this limb here is going to be in the way of going through my scroll saw. So a downfall to using a scroll saw to split a piece of wood is, of course, you're limited by the size, which I knew this already, but I'm going to trim him down just a little bit, make him a little more even with the rest of my wood, change my blade out. I think that second one's getting a little bit dull anyway, and we'll go from there. I'm going to go ahead and stop and see if I can pull it apart without damaging anything. It looks like I may. Well, that makes it easier. So looks like we're a little misaligned there. Wouldn't be the first time I've seen that in a branch flute. Not at all. I think my piece came out of it. Oh no, it's still stuck in there. It's going to be a challenge. It'll take me just a second, and we're going to bring this over to the work table and go from there. Okay, so one thing many of you are probably concerned with is what happens if I don't split it exactly in the middle. Well, you hollow out the other side, the deeper side, a little deeper. That's really how most of them that make branch flutes do it. And any of you who have ever looked at a branch flute and, wow, that sure is beautiful, but oh my gosh, is it expensive? You might start thinking, why? It's a lot of work. I chose to split it with a scroll saw because it's one of the tools we like to use. We haven't had a bandsaw in a while. We're probably getting another one here sometime soon. I've gone through probably 24 bandsaws in my life. From giant floor models to little tabletops and even a micro mini that I had for a while. I really like the scroll saw because it does such fine and clean work, and the blade is so thin. It's about 1/3 of a millimeter-ish thin, so it has a lot of great things you can do with it because of that. Now here is what the piece of wood looks like, kind of interesting looking, and with that in mind, here's our little section right here where we split a little bit too much. Not going to be a problem. I've got a way to fix that up really nice. So the next step is going to be hollowing it out. If you have an idea of what kind of flute you're going to make, that would really help too. So if you think to yourself, well, I want to make a key of A flute, or I want to make a key of G flute, or something like this, you would consider, well, the flute needs to be this long, and I can use one as an example here if I like. Say, for example, let's see. How about my pattern? Could you hand me that right behind you there? So this is a flute length that we use for a pattern sometimes. Typically a key of A flute is from about here to about right there, and you see the inside diameter is about 3/4 of an inch, which is a lot easier to gouge out than 7/8 of an inch. I should warn you. Let's see. So I'm thinking that the overall length of the body of the flute should be something about like that right there, which means that we're going to probably start our gouge right here, and I always like to give myself a little wiggle room. So grab a pencil. I know I told you I'm not going to mark it on the outside, but I will mark it on the inside, just roughly. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay. And then you may want to mark a solid detail of where you're going to put your flute body and your air chamber. And you may want to do that on both pieces of wood so you can keep a relatively good track of where it's going to go. Get it? Good track? Where the track is going to go? Oh, gosh. All you non-flute makers out there. Just kidding. So here is my old school preferred choice for making hollowed out flutes. This is what, like the second type of tool that I started with. It is a pack of multi-purpose X-Acto wood carving router assortments. So I haven't used these in forever and a day, and I found some online the other day and thought, those are going to come in really handy. And there's a variety of different blades that you have in here. I'll show you some of them that you get. And you can get a multitude of different types. Here's a nice one. It's a triangle shape. Cuts out more of a small gouge there and some straight lines. Kind of handy. Not one that I like to use on this particular type of task. And here is a small round router, which I believe is a 1/4 inch, if I remember right. I know the measurements are on here somewhere. So this is a 1/4 inch. We're probably going to wind up using this in just a moment, but I like to stick with the big one first. And then here is a nice square draw knife type. That guy is pretty handy, but once again, because of the size of the surface here of this blade, it's not going to carve really quickly out of this, so I'm going to save it for another project probably. And then here's the one that I've always used, is this big 1/2 inch router gouge knife or draw knife, or call it a number of things. You have to have an X-Acto handle that has this hole in the middle of it. And if you go on X-Acto's website, you can find the different sizes and models and all that kind of stuff. Now, one thing I would like to mention to you is that I'm not telling any of you to go out and make these flutes this way, or at all, making flutes can be something of a dangerous job. I've cut body parts and been hit by 200-mile-an-hour pieces of wood and everything. So this blade here, I've touched it if you haven't noticed, but I'm not telling you to touch it. That sucker's sharp. It'll cut you. Anyway, I've touched it because I know how hard I can touch it. So here is the moment of truth. This is the whole reason we're starting this by hand nonsense, to see if we can do it right. So, hey, yeah, how about that? We got some movement. Yeah, let's see if we can do it the other way better. All the time that I've spent using one of these knives, I've noticed that one of them, one direction carves easier than the other direction. You may find a piece of wood, its grain goes in every direction. So there is some by hand work, by golly. It's tricky to keep this thing going straight too. You don't want to go outside of a certain distance. Some flute makers may even draw themselves some guidelines of how wide they need to make the pitch of the flute. And oh, there we go. Break out the old dusty tool here, and looks like right there is about 3/4 of an inch, which is kind of nice. So we're going to be able to do that. You'll notice only one side of this thing is sharp. So this is a slow go, my friend. Very time consuming. You will spend days doing this. Days. Try to keep it in the center if you can. That's always the best thing to do. There's a hard spot inside of this. Sometimes using the fast and light pull on this knife gets it to go through faster on the hard spots. Let's turn it back around. Not a bad idea to keep rotating the wood if you're using a piece of green wood like this pear, because you don't want to start a hang like this and then pull that hang and it rip off to the side somewhere. That's just a bad idea. Okay, now that you get a taste for what by hand is like, gosh, I think about the first 100 flutes I sold. Whew, them suckers are priceless these days. By hand. I don't mean collector's value, I mean the amount of work I put into them. Thank goodness a gallon of gasoline only costed 75 cents back then. Okay. Anyway, now that you can kind of see where we're headed here, I'm going to show you one other technique that another friend of mine who also made branch flutes used. And another very good friend of ours that makes them pretty regularly, he uses a similar tool. However, his is from a dentist's office, and it's a pretty nice tool. They have them, you can buy them in carving catalogs and what have you, but this is just handy because it's what I'm used to. I don't mention it all the time, but you probably should be safe. Okay, so I found a really handy use for that little triangle router tool here. I used it to make my mouthpiece hole because I've only got a small air supply chamber I've done. And this is 1/2. Oh my gosh, as you noticed, we had to pause the video to recharge batteries, take a lunch break. It's a lot of work making a flute out of a piece of natural curved wood. It's going to look pretty cool though, I think. But it's been an awful lot of work. You can see my track bends along with the piece of wood and has its natural flavor and shape and size of the branch. You know, its natural curvature there. And it's relatively the same size all the way through. Might be a little tighter in here, but I have a feeling I'm going to wind up cutting some of that off anyway, or trimming it up or something. Of course, there'll always be an option of putting some sound holes in it instead. May do that. I don't know. I got to see what I feel like. However, this part of it here looks pretty good, and then this little piece right here, I skinned it up just a bit, making my my sound hole with that little router tool. One thing I'd like to tell you, and I have been reminded of it several times, in my youth when I used to use these little hand router tools all the time, I had scars all over my hands. Oh my gosh. I have cut myself every which way you could possibly imagine with one of these tools, and it isn't hard to do. It is very, very easy to do. Probably the reason you don't find tools like this in hobby stores anymore, and why I have to look online to find them. It is a very sharp little tool, has a lot of potential, and is an excellent tool to use. I'd hate to have to go back and make one of these tools before I started using it, although I've done it before. It's a lot of work. Anyway, so there's 1/2 of it. I still have to do the other half, which I guess you'll get to see some of that too. And I've double checked it too to make sure my limb is still going back together the way it should, because as it dries it'll cause it to warp a little bit, but apparently not so much yet. And I'm going to finish this guy up here so we can glue them together and see if we can't finish them up tomorrow and work on these guys. So we have some others that we're working on. So let's get started on him. Just change this router bit back out. I haven't used my small one yet. A little 1/4 size one. This 1/2 size one's been doing pretty good. You can sharpen these blades. It is dangerous. And one thing, if I haven't mentioned it already, I'd like to mention, I'm not telling you should go out and do this. I've got to tell you, this is a pain in the neck. It really is. It's fun in a lot of ways, and gosh, it's great reminiscing about the good old days, but in the time that I used to do this kind of thing, I think I had a lot more time on my hands than I do today. Something that I would like to mention, that pulling this knife towards your body like this is a big no-no. It is very, very dangerous. If I hadn't been doing this since I was 10 years old, I probably wouldn't be using this knife in this way. However, I think I've grown to trust these knives a little too much. As I said, I've been hurt by them quite a bit. I don't even remember where I got my first ones. I think I may have picked them up at a hobby store when we lived on the Gulf Coast back in the day. You'll be really disappointed too if you're pulling one of these type of knives back at you and you gouge out a whole lot of extra wood and it just goes off to the side. If you were paying attention too, you probably see me use both the gouge and the Dremel at different points, and that's because the Dremel helps to make a nice track for the gouge to go in, and once you've got the track going, it's less likely that it's going to fly out of the bounds. Okay, one more battery dead. Okay, so for those of you that may have missed out on the fingerings that I used, I basically chose a flute pattern size that was roughly the same size as the inside of the hole that I've made here for the flute. Of course, I could have made the hole a little bit larger, but as I mentioned, that would be a little bit more work making it that way. So here is a 3/4 A and a 9/16 A 5-hole flute pattern, and I've kind of used this 3/4 size and basically just place the holes following the path of the track here, the gouge inside of the flute, you know, basically from here to there, and then each of these holes along the line, wherever they may lay. I've just kind of followed them along with what's in the book here. Now, I do have a chapter on page 72 of our book called Alternative Materials for Making Flutes. Many of the alternative materials that I have listed in here can be anything. This corn stalks, here's a whole lot of corn stalks there, and sawgrass. I think I've got sawgrass and corn stalks mixed in there. You can get materials to make flutes out of from everywhere. There's some really nice branches on that tree. And then we've already made a video making sunflower stalk flutes, which is a great material in my opinion. A lot of people probably think, nah, not sunflower stalks because it's weak or what have you, but I really enjoyed it. Anyway, so our book, The Art of Native American Flute Making, quite a inspiration for some people, it seems, to learn more about the art of making flutes. And I have got these two pieces here ready to glue together. Finally, we have a air supply hole in here. You notice this side here is just a little bit shorter than that one. It's going to be just fine. And then we have our trackway here, which I think I'm going to probably burn some of, but I don't know if I'm going to burn all of it because it's got a little twist on it. When I say burn it, I mean with a rod like we normally do. I am about to torch the inside of this and glue it together. Torching it may not be as necessary as it is with some materials that we use, because I've spent so much time sanding this fella here that torching it, I don't know if it's going to do a whole lot for the actual smoothness of the flute path there. Never hurts though, right? Just darken it up a little bit. Because this is mostly green wood here, it makes it very difficult to torch it the way I normally do with my dry wood. I'm holding the torch on it for a long time and it's not really doing much here. So let's do that. I guess I'll do a light bit in the air supply hole. Not really a whole lot. Just a little bit there. Seems like everything with regards to making branch flutes is time consuming. And though there are ways to accomplish it, I don't like to approach it as if it were an exact science. This ain't rocket science. Anyway, let's see here. So we have a few things there, and it looks pretty good. A lot of my friends that make branch flutes, and I say my friends that make branch flutes, I've got some friends that do it professionally for a living. I've done it several times, but just not really, like I say, my regular deal. However, a lot of my friends that do it, they use a piece of bicycle inner tube at this point to lash it together with. They'll put their glue on their sides and get it set up the way you normally would just about any flute. And then they'll come back and rubber band it, per se, together. Kind of like the way we recommend doing our flute kits. They'll do that, however, with a piece of bicycle inner tube. Some of them use the tourniquet material that you get from the hospital. As a rubber material, like if you're giving somebody a shot or what have you. That stuff works okay. I think I have another friend that uses slingshot rubber bands that he buys at his local hobby store. I'm going to do this the same way I do everything else. I'm going to use a clamp. And of course, I'm sure there are countless other methods. I have some C-clamps. I might use one of those here or there. However, I think I'm going to very carefully use some of my squeezy clamps and squeeze this sucker together. And I say carefully, I'm going to squeeze it together, but not so hard that it cracks. There we go. And many of you may have noticed too that I'm using some Gorilla wood glue right now. This stuff doesn't expand. As you've probably watched many of my videos, I usually use Tite Bond. Sometimes I use Elmer's wood glue, the professional grade. This time I'm going to use some Gorilla Glue just to see if it's going to help hold it together any better. If you see glue coming out of the cracks, you're doing pretty good. Let's just get a barrage of clamps going here. Glue is coming out of the cracks. Just lay this dude down. See if I can't get glue all over my table saw again. That's always fun to work with. Go there. My guesstimate is it's going to take about 9 clamps. Let's see if I've got that guy straight. There we go. I think that clamp is just about ready to be replaced. Sometimes these squeezy clamps, as nice as they are, for some things, they go bad after a time of using them. And that's okay. It's part of life. Nothing's meant to last forever, right? Starting to question my friends out there that use the rubber bands. Maybe this is a better technique. I don't know. Seems to be going pretty good. Let's turn them this way. There we go. How about that? Always looking for a better way to approach a situation. I did say 9 clamps, didn't I? I wonder how many we have up there so far. Did I mean to say 12? There we go. Looks like I've got the end of it popping out of line just a little bit. We're going to fix that. What I like to do to fix that with most of our flutes is put a clamp on it there, push it down, and now clamp it together with another clamp. I'm going to put this one here on the end. How about that? Now we can take this guy off and use him over here. I think at this moment it appears that I only have 10 on there. Although I see several places I could probably add some if I wanted to. I'm just going to get some of this runoff off of him. And I think I'm going to put a little bit in this crack here. There we go. And let's see what it looks like here. So far, so good. I'm going to flip him over and take a look at the seam on this side and see what that looks like. And also give it a little wipe down here. Might be a little harder on this side. There's a spot where I cut into it, if you remember from the beginning of the video. I think I'm just going to use some of this glue to seal that up. Since I'm not going to take the bark off of it, or at least try not to, this really thin sealing job I'm doing here is probably going to be perfect. If it ever leaks in the future, of course, you all know me, I'll use some super glue. Super glue is a handy dandy woodworker's friend. Probably could sell a lot of that stuff, I bet. I don't think they need my help really. People use super glue for everything. Even people in automotive use it. Lots of stuff. Okay, there we go. So we've got a really neat looking flute. I'm just going to replace this clamp. It is not happy. It needs to go in my exchange box. There we go. That one's got it. Tight, tight. I think I could probably put another one beside that one, but I'm not sure that it's necessary. One day you are going to have to hear my Eddie Murphy impersonation about necessary. So there is a flute which is all clamped together. I'm going to set this flute somewhere out of the way that it can dry, and then we'll go ahead and run our other flute here. I'm just going to set it, I don't even know where I'm going to set it, I'll find a place. We'll set up for our other flute that we're going to make, and then we'll finish that one up pretty quick.